Some places aren't just built on land, they're built on pain. Welcome to the Dreisbach farmhouse outside Wautoma, Wisconsin, a place where sorrow isn't just an emotion, it's a foundation. My name is Elias Dreher, a pastor, an exorcist, called to confront a darkness woven into the very walls. I was given 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the most unsettling place you've ever been? Tell me in the comments below. Me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to step across this threshold, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because in this house, the dead don't rest, they build. The assignment begins now. The old Dreisbach place, outside Wautoma, didn't just stand on the Wisconsin soil. It festered, an architectural chancre bleeding a quiet, unseen sorrow into the crisp autumn air. It squatted on a low rise, dark against a gunmetal sky, its windows like vacant eyes staring out from a face ravaged by time and an unspeakable internal decay. Even from the county road I could feel it, a cold, psychic pressure, the distinct miasma of a place where profound trauma had not just occurred, but had become part of the very mortar and wood. My name is Elias Dreher, pastor, and in the quieter, less acknowledged corridors of the Lutheran Synod, an exorcist. Not the Hollywood kind, with spinning heads and projectile vomit. My work was more nuanced, a wrestling with older, more insidious shadows, with entities that wove themselves into the fabric of memory and place, where language itself became a weapon, and the scent of spiritual corruption was as tangible as wood smoke. My background as a linguist, specializing in archaic Semitic and pre-Babylonian dialects, had proven unexpectedly useful in this calling. Some evils I'd learned responded only to the oldest words, the original grammars of dread. The original grammars of dread. The summons had come 3 days prior. A family of 5, the Millers, residents of the Dreisbach farmhouse, found brutally murdered. No clear motive, no suspect. Just a scene of almost ritualistic carnage that had shaken even the hardened local sheriff. And the whispers, the old whispers about the Dreisbach place, about the secessionist Anabaptist cult that had occupied it a century ago, practicing their own uniquely savage internal purifications before vanishing without a trace. The church, in its quiet wisdom, knew that some grounds, once soaked in sufficient blood and aberrant faith, never truly lay fallow. Accompanying me, at the synod's polite insistence, was Dr. Riley Tanzer, a brisk, sharp-featured academic from Marquette University, specializing in environmental psychology and anomalous belief systems. Her presence was meant to lend an air of detached, scientific observation, to perhaps find a mundane explanation for the inevitable local hysteria. I sensed in her a barely concealed skepticism, a professional disdain for the superstitions my work represented. Before we left the subdued quiet of the Wautoma Lutheran parish, a small, white clapboard church that felt a universe away from the brooding menace of the Dreisbach farm. Old Pastor Gunderson, his hands trembling slightly, pressed a worn, leather-bound journal into my hands. This was Thomas Vane's, he said, his voice low. The pastor who tried to cleanse the Dreisbach place back in '78. He didn't come back. Tucked inside the journal, its pages filled with Vane's increasingly frantic script, was a single loose sheet of brittle paper. On it, in the same spidery handwriting, were 3 rules, each one a cold spike into the heart of my unease. 1. Never enter houses where entire families died violently. The trauma has created permanent portals, a rule I was, by the very nature of my assignment, about to irrevocably break. 2. If you smell fresh blood during the ritual but see none, leave immediately. The house is still feeding. My stomach tightened. The sensory details were always the most insidious. 3. When flies appear from nowhere during your prayers, count them. If there are 666, the building itself is possessed. The ink on the note looked wrong, too dark, too stark against the yellowed paper, as if it had been written recently. Despite Vaden's decades-long disappearance, an unsettling premonition prickled at me. The old fear, the one born from a long-ago case where an entity had whispered my childhood nickname from the shadows. That some things knew you, even before you crossed their threshold. As Dr. Tanzer and I pulled up the long, weed-choked driveway towards the Dreisbach farmhouse, the structure seemed to loom larger, to drink the gray daylight. I stepped out of the car, my liturgical stole feeling heavy around my neck. A single large, iridescent black fly, fat and slow, detached itself from the peeling paint of the porch railing. It buzzed lazily past my face, so close I could feel the faint stir of its wings, then veered off, disappearing through a broken pane in a dark upstairs window. The house, it seemed, had already noted our arrival. The front door of the Dreisbach farmhouse creaked open with a sound like a dying breath, revealing a dim, dust-choked hallway. The air inside was heavy, stagnant, thick with the cloying sweetness of decay, the sharp tang of old mildew, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet that prickled at the back of my throat. An aroma I knew too well from other, similarly blighted places. It was the lingering perfume of shed blood. No matter how thoroughly scrubbed, Dr. Tanzer, to her credit, showed no outward sign of revulsion, her gaze sharp, analytical, already taking in the peeling wallpaper, the cobweb-draped furniture covered in ghostly sheets. Remarkable state of preservation, considering the circumstances, she murmured, more to herself than to me, her voice a jarring note of academic detachment in the oppressive, listening silence. We moved deeper into the house, our footsteps echoing unnaturally on the warped floorboards. The silence wasn't empty. It was watchful, coiled. It was in the living room, amidst overturned furniture and dark, ambiguous stains on the patterned rug that we found him. He seemed to materialize from the deepest shadows of a far corner, a gaunt, spectral figure emerging as if from the very walls. Young, perhaps late 20s, with wild, unkempt hair and eyes like burnt holes in a pale, drawn face. He wore clothes that looked as if he'd slept in them for weeks. For a horrifying moment, I thought he was another echo, another replay of the tragedy. Who are you? He rasped, his voice thin, brittle, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Pastor Elias Dreher, I said, keeping my voice calm, steady. And this is Dr. Riley Tanzer. We're here from the church and the university. Jeremiah, he whispered, his gaze darting between us, never quite settling. Jeremiah Holt. This was my family's house. Is my house. He gestured vaguely at the surrounding desiccation. I hid. When it happened, in the cellar, I heard everything. His voice cracked, a tremor running through his thin frame. Dr. Tanzer's eyes lit with a flicker of professional interest. A survivor, a primary source. I felt a deeper, colder unease. There was something off about Jeremiah, something beyond the expected trauma. A stillness, a peculiar resonance with the house itself, as if he were another fixture, another piece of its blighted architecture. Dismissing my disquiet as professional caution, I began the rite of assessment, my voice a low murmur, as I intoned the ancient prayers of sanctification. The Latin, a familiar shield against the encroaching dread. I sprinkled holy water, its droplets hissing faintly as they struck the stained floorboards. Asperges me, Domini, Hyssopo, et mundabor. I was barely into the second versicle, the words of cleansing forming on my lips when it hit me, an overwhelming, visceral wave of scent, so potent it made my stomach lurch. Fresh blood, Coppery, metallic, sickeningly sweet. It filled my nostrils, my lungs, as if a fresh wound had been opened at my feet. My eyes darted around the room. Nothing, no visible source. The stains on the rug were old, dry. Dr. Tanzer, I noticed, was sniffing the air with a puzzled frown. But her expression was one of curiosity, not revulsion. She smelled only dust, perhaps a dead rodent in the walls. Jeremiah watched me, a single, almost imperceptible muscle twitching at the corner of his eye, a flicker of something dark and knowing in the depths of his hollow gaze. If you smell fresh blood during the ritual but see none, leave immediately. The house is still feeding. Pastor Vane's rule, stark and urgent. The house hadn't just noted our arrival. It had tasted my presence, my intent. It was already feeding on the essence of the rite, perhaps on my own spiritual signature. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to heed Vane's desperate warning. But there was Dr. Tanzer, her notebook already out, and Jeremiah, a supposed victim needing solace, and my own stubborn, ingrained sense of duty. I pressed on, my voice faltering only slightly, the scent of unseen blood, a nauseating counterpoint to the sacred words. As I continued, the house began to respond more overtly. A faint, childish lullaby, achingly sweet and sorrowful, seemed to drift from an unseen heating vent near the ceiling. A door at the far end of the hallway creaked open, slowly, deliberately, revealing only deeper darkness within. The temperature in the room plummeted, a damp, grave-like chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. And on the peeling wallpaper beside the mantelpiece, a patch of faded roses seemed to writhe, the pattern for a horrifying instant, resolving into a silent, screaming human face before blurring back into innocuous floral design. The house was awake, and it knew my name. The rite of cleansing was a battle fought in whispers and shadows. As I moved through the blighted rooms of the Dreisbach farmhouse, each prayer, each invocation was met with a subtle, insidious resistance. The air grew heavy, like wool soaked in grave water. Cold spots drifted like unseen entities. The shadows in the corners no longer just lurked. They stretched, elongated, mimicking grotesque, fleeting tableaus. A raised arm, a falling blow, a silent, contorted scream. The house was replaying its trauma, forcing its horrors upon us. It was in the master bedroom, a place of particular desolation where the bloodstains were darkest, that she first appeared clearly. Rebecca Holt. Or rather, a mournful, translucent echo. She flickered into existence near a shattered vanity mirror. A young woman, her spectral face a mask of terror and an unutterable sadness. She wore a simple nightgown, torn and stained with phantom blood. She didn't speak, but her eyes, wide and pleading, fixed on me, and she gestured with a desperate, anemic hand towards a dark, ominous stain on the far wall, beneath a crudely boarded-up window. The unsettling part, the detail that wormed its way under my skin like a maggot, was her face. She bore an uncanny, almost painful resemblance to Sarah, a young woman from my seminary days, a bright, kind soul I had failed in a different, more mundane, but no less tragic way. The house, it seemed, had already delved into my private lexicon of regrets. Dr. Tanzer beside me shivered, rubbing her arms. "Remarkable thermal variance in this area, Pastor," she muttered, scribbling furiously in her notebook. And the infrasound. It could certainly induce feelings of unease, paranoia even. She saw nothing but science. I saw a targeted psychological assault. Jeremiah's behavior grew more alarming. He trailed us through the house like a gaunt shadow, his silence punctuated by fits of muttering. Sometimes, the words were a jumbled, traumatized recollection of that night. Other times, they weren't his own. He'd lapse into an archaic, guttural dialect, phrases I recognized from my linguistic studies as belonging to the long-vanished Anabaptist cult. He would describe, with chilling accuracy, rituals of blood sacrifice and sacred union with the soil that predated the Miller family by a century. He seemed to anticipate the house manifestations, flinching just before a door slammed, or staring intently at a blank wall, moments before a shadow play of violence erupted upon it. He was not just in the house, he was of it. It was Rebecca's apparition, her sorrowful gaze guiding me, that led me to Pastor Vane's fuller journal. Not the one Gunderson had given me, but another, more private, more desperate volume. It was hidden beneath a loose floorboard in what had clearly been the children's nursery, a room still cloyingly sweet with the phantom scent of baby powder and something else: fear. This journal was a raw, unfiltered chronicle of Vane's descent. He wrote of the house as a sentient trap, of its ability to warp perception to feed on memory. He detailed his attempts to understand its language, its architecture of dread, and he wrote with increasing terror of the voice, a voice that whispered from the vents, from the cracks in the walls, a voice that knew his secret sins, his deepest shames, a voice that promised to restore what he had lost, if only he would cooperate. As I read Vanny's frantic, spidery script under the weak beam of my flashlight, a profound unease settled over me. The ink on certain pages seemed darker, the handwriting subtly different from one paragraph to the next. I reread a passage I was certain I'd just absorbed, a chilling account of the house breathing. The words were no longer there. In their place was a new sentence, one that hadn't existed moments before. It tests the new shepherd, Elias. It seeks the cracks in his faith. The journal was not a static record. It was alive, and it was learning. The house malevolence was no longer subtle. It was an open, festering wound. Objects flew from shelves with violent force. Doors didn't just slam. They buckled in their frames as if struck by an invisible battering ram. The disembodied lullaby that drifted from the vents had become a mocking, discordant dirge, its melody punctuated by wet, tearing sounds and the choked sobs of a child. I felt the house actively sifting through my mind, my memories, projecting images from my past onto the decaying walls. Faces I'd forgotten, failures I'd tried to bury, all resurrected, recontextualized into new, insidious threats. My faith, my sanity were under siege. It was during the litany of supplication, my voice raw as I desperately invoked names of power, of protection, that the third rule made its horrifying manifestation. Flies, they appeared as if conjured from the very air, from the pores of the rotting wood, from the shadows themselves. Not a few, not dozens, but a living, buzzing, crawling carpet of them. They swarmed the windows, obscuring the weak daylight, their multifaceted eyes glinting. They landed on my crucifix, on the open pages of my ritual romanum, on my skin, their tiny, tickling legs a torment. Dr. Tanser, who had been attempting to set up EM detectors, let out a choked gasp, swatting at the air, her scientific composure finally shattering. This is impossible. Some sort of mass insectile hysteria? A pheromonal trigger? Count them. Vane's rule. My heart hammered against my ribs. With a growing, nauseating dread, I began to count, under my breath, the black, buzzing bodies that coalesced on a large yellowed water stain on the ceiling directly above me. 10, 50, 200. The number climbed with terrifying speed, a black tide of filth and corruption. 400, 550. The air was thick with their buzzing, a sound like a million tiny, profane prayers. 600, 6, and more. Many more. The building itself was not just possessed. It was pestilence. It was legion. This is untenable. Dr. Tanzer stammered, her face pale, her voice trembling. I need proper samples, controlled conditions. Her academic curiosity, however, was a stubborn, resilient thing. She fixed on the sealed door in the cellar, the one Jeremiah had warned us against with such frantic, almost animalistic terror. Anne's journal, too, had marked it with a symbol, denoting a place of primal foundational corruption. The heart of the anointed, the cult had called it. That room, Pastor, she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its former authority, though her eyes were wide with a new, unfamiliar fear. The atmospheric pressure, the particulate matter. I must get readings from in there. It could be the source of these environmental anomalies. Doctor, no, Aya cried. But she was already moving, her scientific imperative overriding common sense, overriding the palpable aura of dread that pulsed from behind that sealed door. Jeremiah let out a low, guttural moan, shrinking back against the wall as if physically struck. Tanzer ignored us both. She pried at the crude wooden planks Jeremiah or someone had nailed across the cellar door. With a splintering crack, the seal broke. She pushed the door inward. A rush of air, impossibly cold, impossibly rank, smelling of damp earth, spoiled meat, and something else, something ancient and utterly alien, billowed out. For a moment, nothing. Dr. Tanzer stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting into the Stygian blackness. Fascinating. Localized temperature drop, off the charts. Then, a sound. Not a scream, not a cry, but a soft, wet thump like a heavy sack of grain dropped onto a dirt floor, followed by an absolute profound silence. Dr. Tanzer, I called, my voice tight. No answer. I forced myself towards the open cellar door, my heart a cold stone in my chest. I shone my flashlight into the darkness. The room was small, stone-lined, empty. Utterly empty. Except for Dr. Tanzer's expensive audio recorder lying on the damp earth floor. Its small red recording light still blinking. Lighter. My hands shaking so violently I could barely operate the buttons. I played it back. Tanzer's voice, crisp and academic, making observations. Extreme cold, anomalous magnetic readings, distinct smell of organic decomposition, yet no visible source. Then, a sharp intake of breath, a confused, almost childlike whimper. What is that? It's in the walls. God, and then nothing but the soft rhythmic sound of breathing. Close to the microphone. Slow, steady, inhumanly calm. And beneath it, so faint I almost missed it, a whisper, the voice in the vent, softly, patiently, repeating Riley Tanzer's full, given name over and over, like a catechism of the damned. Dr. Tanzer's disappearance was not a vanishing. It was an absorption. The house had consumed her. Her curiosity, her skepticism, her very name now, a whispered litany in its dark internal corridors. Any lingering shred of doubt I might have harbored about the nature of this place, about the literal truth of Pastor Vane's desperate warnings, was obliterated, leaving only a cold, hard certainty. This was not a haunting. It was a hostile takeover, an ancient, architectural intelligence methodically deconstructing reality and everyone in it. And Jeremiah was no longer just a traumatized survivor in my eyes. He was a key, a conduit, perhaps even a willing accomplice in this unholy symbiosis. His reactions, his fragmented utterances in the cult's dead language, his unsettling resonance with the house's rhythms, it all painted a picture far more disturbing than simple possession. Rebecca Holt's apparition became a near-constant companion in the ensuing hours. She seemed more agitated now, her spectral form flickering with an urgent, sorrowful energy. She would appear at the edge of my vision, beckoning me with translucent hands, leading me deeper into the house's labyrinthine illusions. Sometimes, she would lead me to small, poignant remnants of the Miller family, a child's discarded toy, a mother's forgotten knitting, each discovery triggering a fresh wave of empathic pain, a new sensory assault from the house as it replayed their final, terrified moments. Other times she seemed to be guiding me towards something else, something hidden. But each step deeper into the house was a step deeper into its psychic mire, the walls themselves seeming to whisper my own forgotten fears, my most private shames, the names of those I had failed. The names of those I had failed. The house was not just showing me its history, it was excavating mine. The altered passages in Vane's journal became my unstable compass. Half of it felt like the desperate jottings of a man losing his mind to an unimaginable horror. The other half felt like the house itself, a cold, calculating intelligence masquerading as Vane, offering poisoned advice, subtly twisting scripture, trying to guide my actions towards an end of its own choosing. It was a battle of exegesis, me trying to sift Vane's true warnings from the house's insidious interpolations. The confrontation with Jeremiah came in the heart of the house, the master bedroom, where the Miller parents had met their end, where Rebecca's echo was strongest. He was there, sitting on the edge of the stripped, stained mattress, rocking back and forth, muttering to himself. The air was thick with the phantom scent of blood and the cloying sweetness of the lullaby that never seemed to cease. Jeremiah, I said, my voice firm, trying to cut through the miasma of grief and corruption. What did the voice in the vent promise you? He looked up, his eyes like black, empty sockets. For a moment he seemed confused, a lost child. Then, a slow, chilling smile spread across his lips, a smile that did not belong on that gaunt, youthful face. It was ancient, knowing, and utterly devoid of human warmth. It promised reunion, he whispered, his voice taking on the reedy, sibilant quality of the vent itself. It promised to make them whole again. The Millers, they were imperfect, flawed, like my first family. The voice, it understands, it purifies, it rebuilds. Your first family? I pressed, a cold dread coiling in my gut. Vane's journal had spoken of the Dreisbach land being tainted long before the cult, of older, darker sacrifices. They didn't understand the house needs, Jeremiah, the voice continued, a subtle shift in his posture, a new, unsettling authority in his gaze. They fought its embrace. The Millers, they were more receptive, especially after the first correction. He gestured vaguely towards the dark stains on the floor. And you, Pastor Dreher, you with your old words, your understanding, you are the final component. Your faith, your fear, your very essence. It will complete the new foundation. It will make the new Millers strong. Perfect. The horrible truth slammed into me. Jeremiah hadn't just survived the massacre of his family. He had, under the guidance of the voice in the vent, orchestrated it. Perhaps not the initial act, the first correction that had so traumatized him, but the subsequent ones, making his family receptive. He wasn't possessed. He was a devotee, a high priest of this architectural abomination, sacrificing his family, and now attempting to sacrifice me, to fuel the house's power, to bring about its grotesque, promised resurrection. He was the architect of ruin, the house its devouring blueprint. They won't be your family, Jeremiah, I said, my voice low and tense. They'll be puppets, echoes, empty shells filled with this house malice. You lie, he shrieked, leaping to his feet, his eyes blazing with a fanatic's light. The voice promised. It showed me. They'll be happy. We'll all be happy. As if on cue, the house itself erupted. The walls of the bedroom seemed to dissolve, replaced by a swirling vortex of shadows and distorted images. The Miller family, their faces contorted in terror, then shifting, smoothing, their eyes becoming vacant, their smiles fixed, doll-like. The lullaby from the vent swelled, becoming a deafening, discordant symphony. The very floor beneath my feet seemed to buck and heave. The scent of fresh blood was overpowering, mixed with the smell of damp earth, as if the house were exhuming its deepest, most rotten secrets. The voice in the vent was no longer a whisper. It was a chorus, a legion, booming from every corner of the room, using the synthesized voice of Dr. Tanzer, the choked cries of the Miller children, the frantic prayers of Pastor Vane, and then, chillingly, a soft, gentle voice I hadn't heard in 30 years. My mother's voice, calling my childhood nickname, begging me to come home. Elias, be with us, be safe. Jeremiah advanced, his hands outstretched, his face a mask of beatific, terrifying conviction. Join us, Pastor. Become part of the new design. Be eternal. I had to break him. Not the house, not yet. Him. His faith was the conduit. His belief was the mortar. Carnage Journal, in one of its few, clear, untampered passages, had spoken of the cult's ritual of unmaking, a rite of severing belief by confronting the believer with the undeniable profane truth of their corrupted deity. Look at them, Jeremiah, I roared, pointing at the grotesque, puppet-like apparitions of the Miller family that now danced and smiled with vacant, horrifying cheerfulness in the swirling chaos. Are those your parents? Is that gentle Rebecca? Or are they just masks, hollow things animated by the hunger of this place? I raised my crucifix, not as a weapon against the house, but as a mirror to Jeremiah. What did it make you do, Jeremiah? Rebecca's true echo, the sorrowful, translucent one, flickered into existence beside the grotesque, smiling puppet that wore her face. She looked at Jeremiah, her spectral eyes filled with an unbearable grief, and she slowly, heartbreakingly, shook her head. For the first time, a flicker of doubt, of pure, unadulterated horror, crossed Jeremiah's face. The voice in the vent shrieked, a sound of pure, concentrated fury, as if its control were slipping. The house shuddered violently. The carefully constructed illusion was cracking. The architect was beginning to doubt his God. Jeremiah stared, his face a battleground of dawning horror, and the voices desperate, furious reassurances. Rebecca's true, sorrowful echo, standing beside the house's grotesque caricature of her, was a silent, devastating testimony. The carefully constructed illusion the voice had woven around him for years, the promise of a perfected family, was unraveling like rotten thread. No, he whispered, his voice cracking, the fanatic light in his eyes dimming, replaced by a raw, terrified confusion. It promised they would be whole. It lied, Jeremiah. My voice cut through the cacophony of the house rage, the shrieking winds, the slamming doors, the deafening chorus of stolen voices. This place doesn't create. It consumes. It doesn't heal. It corrupts. Look, I swept my arm towards a swirling vortex of manipulated memories. The smiling, puppet-like Millers flickered, their forms distorting, revealing glimpses of the true, agonizing terror of their final moments, their vacant smiles twisting into silent screams. The house, its control over Jeremiah faltering, was losing its grip on the refined illusion, revealing the raw, festering wound beneath. The voice in the vent roared, a sound that vibrated through my very bones, a sound of pure, primal fury. He is mine, priest. The architect will complete the design, The walls of the bedroom seemed to bleed a thick, black ichor. The floorboards buckled and splintered. The entire structure felt as if it were about to implode. Jeremiah clutched his head, screaming, a tearing, animalistic sound of a soul being ripped apart. The symbiotic link, the twisted faith that had bound him to this malevolent architecture, was shattering. And as it shattered, the house recoiled as if from a mortal wound. Its power, so intrinsically tied to Jeremiah's belief and participation, was violently, catastrophically disrupted. "The cellar!" I yelled, grabbing Jeremiah's arm. He was limp, almost catatonic, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at the unraveling horrors. "The heart of it," Vane called it. "The anointed place. We have to sever it there." Rebecca's true echo, her form now faint but resolute, pointed urgently towards the floor, towards the path leading downwards. She was urging us on, dragging the near-comatose Jeremiah. I plunged into the swirling chaos of the house, death throes, hallways twisted and changed, stairs lengthened into impossible descents. The faces of the dead, the Millers, Vane, even Tanza, flashed from the walls, their voices begging, pleading. The flies, thousands of them, swarmed, a buzzing, biting cloud of despair. But something had changed. The house's attacks felt unfocused now, more reflexive, like the thrashing of a dying beast. Its connection to Jeremiah, its primary conduit and interpreter, was broken. It was lashing out blindly. We reached the cellar door, the one Tanzer had breached. It hung ajar, a black maw exhaling a stench of ancient earth and profound corruption. Inside, the small, stone-lined room was no longer empty. In its center, where Tanzer's recorder had lain, the very earth seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly luminescence, and from a gaping, jagged hole in the far wall, a section of the house stone foundation, something like a vast, dark root system, or a congealed mass of solidified shadow, throbbed with a slow, malevolent rhythm. This was it. The physical nexus, the heart of the devouring structure. Vane's journal, in a final, desperate, almost illegible scrawl, one I now knew to be truly his, had mentioned an unmaking rite from the cult's own blasphemous texts, not an exorcism to cast out, but a ritual to dissolve, to return the corrupted elements to their primal, unformed state. It required a focus, a sacrifice of corrupted faith, and the invocation of names of desolation, of undoing. Jeremiah was the sacrifice, not his life, but his belief, already shattered. "Jeremiah." I shook him, forcing him to look at the pulsating horror in the room. "Renounce it. Renounce the voice, the house, the false promises. Name its lies." His eyes slowly, painfully focused. He saw the throbbing heart of the corruption. He saw Rebecca's sorrowful echo pointing towards it, her expression one of desperate hope, and he began to speak, his voice weak, broken, but clear. He renounced the voice, named its deceptions, confessed his own horrific acts, his words not of defiance, but of a terrible, soul-crushing grief and repentance. As he spoke, the pulsating mass in the cellar began to shrink, to wither. The sickly light dimmed. The house around us screamed, a final ear-splitting cacophony of tearing wood, shattering glass, and 1,000 dying whispers. I raised my voice, intoning the harsh, guttural syllables of Vane's unmaking rite, words that felt like ash and broken glass in my mouth. The very stones of the cellar seemed to weep a black, viscous fluid. The air grew impossibly cold. And then, with a sound like a mountain cracking in two, the pulsating heart of the house imploded, collapsing in on itself, leaving only a gaping, smoking hole in the foundation, exhaling a final, chilling gust of ancient, dead air. Silence, absolute, profound. The house was quiet, still, just an old, broken farmhouse, its malevolence extinguished, its hunger finally, blessedly, starved. Rebecca's echo gave one last, fleeting grateful smile, then dissolved into the settling dust. Jeremiah Holt survived, though survived is perhaps too generous a term. When the authorities finally arrived days later, alerted by a concerned Pastor Gunderson after my prolonged silence, they found him wandering the blighted fields around the Dreisbach farm, catatonic, his mind shattered beyond repair. He was institutionalized, another victim of the Wautoma tragedy, his chilling confessions dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized, broken man. The official report cited structural collapse due to age and neglect for the state of the farmhouse. The Miller family murders remained unsolved, a dark stain on the county's history. Dr. Riley Tanza was never found, declared missing, presumed to have wandered off and succumbed to the elements during her unauthorized private research. Pastor Thomas Venus journals, both the original and the house's corrupted copy, were lost in the subsequent instability of the structure. My report to the Synod was heavily redacted, focusing on the successful pacification of a disturbed site. The full truth was too monstrous, too unbelievable, even for those who dealt in the shadows. My role as an exorcist within the church became quieter, more isolated. Some burdens are meant to be carried alone. I left Wautoma. I sought a new parish, a small, unremarkable church in a town with no dark legends, no brooding, ancient houses. For a time, there was a semblance of peace. The smell of phantom blood no longer haunted my waking hours. The whispers in the vents were just the wind. But the house, the devouring structure, it had methodologies. It had blueprints. About a year later, I was called to consult on a minor disturbance in a newly built suburban home. A young family, terrified by strange noises, cold spots, an inexplicable feeling of being watched. Mundane stuff, usually. As I walked through their bright, modern living room, I felt a faint, almost imperceptible chill near the main air conditioning vent. And for a fleeting instant, I caught a whiff of something, metallic and sweet. Dismissing it as residual paranoia, I began a simple prayer of blessing. That's when I saw it. A single, large, black fly, crawling slowly, deliberately, across the pristine white ceiling. Then another, and another. My blood ran cold. My blood ran cold. That night, I received an anonymous, unmarked envelope. Inside, there was no note. Just a single, folded sheet of paper. An architectural blueprint. The house was unfamiliar, a sprawling Victorian I'd never seen. Yet, as I studied its intricate layout, the strangely placed cellar, the oddly configured master bedroom, the complex network of ventilation shafts, a horrifying, bone-deep familiarity washed over me. At the bottom of the blueprint, in faint, spidery, almost invisible handwriting, almost like a watermark in the very paper, were 3 new rules, different from Vane's, yet chillingly similar in their esoteric sensory dread. The Wautoma sanction had been fulfilled, but the architect of ruin, it seemed, was always looking for new ground upon which to build. And its blueprints, I now understood with a certainty that settled like ice in my soul, were infinite. The work was never truly done. The house was not a place. It was a design, and it was still feeding. The Dreisbach farmhouse holds its darkness close, its architecture a blueprint of despair. Elias Dreher learned that some rules are not just warnings, but battle maps in a war against a living structure. The house may be quiet now, but the architect of ruin remains. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the ultimate revelation. The twist that proves the horror of Wautoma was not unique. The last few moments will leave you questioning every building you enter. What do you think the voice in the vent truly is? What was Jeremiah's role? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it out of the Dreisbach farmhouse, if the flies haven't counted you, then you're already part of our story. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because some homes are built on hell, and the blueprints are infinite.